Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine a small village, a cold mountain valley in northern Turkey. There are no grand palaces here, no powerful armies, just a small group of people trying to survive, trying to find their place in a dangerous world. Their leader is a man named Osman. He has perhaps 400 soldiers. 400, not 4,000, not 40,000. 400. And yet, from this tiny beginning, from this cold mountain valley, from these 400 men, would grow the most powerful empire the world had seen in 1,000 years. An empire that would last for 600 years. An empire that would rule 3 continents. An empire that would build some of the most beautiful cities in human history. An empire that would shape the world we live in today, in ways most people never realize. And then, after 6 centuries of power, it would disappear, almost overnight. This is the story of the Ottoman Empire, and I promise you, it is one of the most extraordinary stories ever told. I am so glad you chose to spend this time with me today. So settle in, get comfortable, and let us travel back together, 600 years into the past, to a cold valley in Turkey, where everything began. If you enjoy learning English through stories like this, please subscribe to Timeless English. Every week we bring you a beautiful new story in slow, clear, simple English, just for you. The world of 1299 was a world of chaos. The great Mongol armies had swept through Central Asia. They had destroyed cities. They had ended empires. They had killed millions. The Islamic world was broken. The great Caliphate of Baghdad had been destroyed. The most important city in the Muslim world burned to the ground. The library, the scholars, the centuries of accumulated knowledge, gone into this broken world. Into this dangerous and uncertain time, a small Turkish tribe found itself on the edge of what remained of the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire was the eastern half of the old Roman Empire. It was old. It was weak. But it was still there, still powerful enough to matter. And on its borders, this small Turkish tribe, led by their chief Osman, looked out at the world and made a decision. They would not simply survive. They would grow. Osman was not a man of words. He was a man of action. He led raids into Byzantine territory. Small raids at first. Careful. Testing. Learning where the weaknesses were. Other Turkish warriors heard about him, about this man who was winning. In a world where everyone was losing, they came to join him. Slowly, his 400 became 1,000, his 1,000 became 5,000, and the small raids became something more, something larger. Something that was starting to look like a conquest. A beautiful city at the foot of a great mountain. Rich. Well defended. Osman wanted it. He besieged it. He surrounded it. He waited. For years. This was the Ottoman way of war. Not always the dramatic charge. Not always the great battle. Just patient. Just pressure. Just waiting until the other side had no choice. Osman was dying when it happened. Some say he died on the same day his army entered the city, as if he had been waiting, just to know that his dream had become real. His son Orhan took the throne, and Orhan had bigger dreams than his father. He looked west, across the water, to Europe. In 1354, something happened that would change history. An earthquake struck a Byzantine fortress called Gallipoli. The walls collapsed. The Byzantine soldiers fled, and Ottoman forces simply walked in. For the first time, an Ottoman army stood on European soil. Orhan looked at what had happened, and he understood. This was not just a fortress. This was a door into Europe. And that door was now open. The Ottomans crossed into Europe. They moved through Thrace, through Macedonia, through Bulgaria. The Christian kingdoms of Europe were alarmed. They sent armies to stop them. The armies were defeated. Again and again. Because the Ottomans fought differently. They were organized. They were disciplined. They adapted. They learned from every battle. They were not simply warriors. They were a system. A machine of conquest that was always improving. Partio UR, TBOSLDIER's one of the most extraordinary things about the Ottoman Empire was its army. Specifically, a unit called the Janissaries. The Janissaries were among the most feared soldiers in the world. And here is what makes them extraordinary. They began as children. Every few years, Ottoman officials would travel through the Christian villages of the Balkans. They would select the strongest and most intelligent boys between 8 and 18 years old. These boys were taken from their families, taken to Istanbul, converted to Islam, and trained in warfare, in discipline, in loyalty to the Sultan. These boys became men. These men became soldiers. And these soldiers, who had been taken as children, who had no family, no lands, no loyalty to anyone except the Sultan, became the most effective fighting force of their age. The Janissaries were not just soldiers. They were the Sultan's personal army, his bodyguard, his elite force. And they were completely devoted. Because the empire was all they had. It was their family, their home, their entire world. THEFLOF Constantinople, the year 1453. One of the most important dates in all of human history. Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. A city that had stood for over 1,000 years. The greatest city in the Christian world, protected by massive walls. Walls that had never been broken. Walls that had held against invaders for centuries. The young Ottoman Sultan stood before those walls. He was 21 years old. His name was Mehmed. And he had been dreaming of this city since he was a child. His tutors had read him stories of Constantinople, of its beauty, of its wealth, of its importance. He had decided this city would be his. The Byzantine Emperor Constantine looked down from the walls. He had almost no soldiers, perhaps 7,000 men, to defend a city that needed 50,000. He had sent messages to Europe, begging for help. The help did not come. Europe was too divided, too distracted, too afraid. Constantine was alone. Mehmed had an army of 80,000 men. And he had something else. Something new. Something terrifying. He had cannons. Enormous cannons. Built by a Hungarian engineer named Urban. Cannons so large they had to be transported in pieces and reassembled outside the city walls. When these cannons fired, the sound was heard from miles away. The walls that had stood for 1,000 years began to crack. The siege lasted 53 days. 53 days of cannon fire. 53 days of assault. 53 days of the defenders watching their walls crumble. 1453. The walls finally broke. Ottoman soldiers poured through the gaps. Emperor Constantine fought until the end. He threw off his imperial robes. He picked up a sword. And he died fighting, alongside his last remaining soldiers, defending a city that the rest of the world had abandoned. When Mehmed entered Constantinople, he went first to the great church of Hagia Sophia. He knelt. He prayed. He gave thanks. And then he stood up, and he looked around at the greatest city in the world, which was now his. He was 21 years old, and he had just changed history. Under Mehmed and his successors, the Ottoman Empire grew, and grew, and grew. Istanbul, as Constantinople was now called, became one of the most magnificent cities in the world. Mosques with soaring domes, covered markets filled with spices and silk and gold, schools and hospitals and libraries, people of different religions living together, Muslims, Jews, all protected, all allowed to practice their faith, all contributing to the life of the city. This was the Ottoman system. Not everyone was equal. There were clear hierarchies, clear rules, but there was also a remarkable tolerance, a remarkable ability to absorb different peoples, different cultures, different ideas, into one functioning empire. And then came Suleiman, Suleiman the Magnificent, the 10th Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. He from 1520 to 1506, 46 years, and under him, the empire reached its peak, its greatest extent, its highest point of power and culture. Suleiman expanded the empire east into Persia, south into Arabia and North Africa, north into the heart of Europe. His armies reached the gates of Vienna, the capital of the Habsburg Empire, the heart of Christian Europe. They were stopped there, just barely. But they had come further than any Muslim army had ever come into Europe, and in Istanbul, while his armies conquered, Suleiman built. He built the Suleimani Mosque, one of the most beautiful buildings ever constructed. He reformed the legal system. He supported poets and artists and architects. He wrote poetry himself, under the name Muhibbi, the devoted one. He was a warrior and a poet, a conqueror and a builder, a man of war and a man of beauty. He was, in every sense. Empires do not last forever. After Suleiman, the Ottomans began to change. Slowly, almost invisibly at first. The sultans became less involved in governing. They stayed in their palaces, while advisors and officials made the real decisions. And those officials were often corrupt, often thinking of their own power, their own wealth, not the good of the empire. Meanwhile, Europe was changing rapidly. New technologies, new weapons, new ways of fighting. The Industrial Revolution. The Ottomans were slower to adopt these changes. They held on to the old ways, the old systems, and the gap between them and Europe grew wider. Military defeats began to happen. Territory was lost, first in Europe, then in North Africa, then in Arabia. The empire that had once seemed invincible was becoming fragile. Subject peoples who had once been content under Ottoman rule were now demanding independence. Nationalism was spreading. The idea that people of the same language, the same culture, the same history, should have their own country. This idea was dangerous for an empire. An empire is built on many peoples accepting one ruler. Nationalism says each people should rule themselves. And once that idea spreads, empires begin to crack. Thck mano f Europe by the 19th century. People in Europe had a name for the Ottoman Empire. They called it the sick men of Europe. Once power, slowly, unable to compete, unable to reform fast enough, losing territory year by year. The Ottomans tried to modernize. They built new schools. They reformed the army. They wrote new laws. They tried to catch up with Europe, but it was difficult. The old system resisted change. The religious establishment resisted change. The army resisted change. Every reform met with opposition. Every new idea met with suspicion. And the defeats continued. And the territory continued to shrink. And the empire continued to weaken. The First World War. The Ottomans made a fateful decision. They joined the war on the side of Germany and Austria-Hungary against Britain, France, and Russia. It was a gamble. If Germany won, the Ottomans hoped to recover lost territory, to become powerful again. Germany did not win, and when Germany surrendered in 1918, the Ottoman Empire surrendered too. The victorious powers divided Ottoman territory among themselves. Britain took Iraq and Palestine. France took Syria and Lebanon. Greece was given parts of Anatolia, the heartland of Turkey itself. What remained of the empire was almost nothing. And then, from this disaster, something unexpected happened. A general named Mustafa Kemal, who had been one of the few successful Ottoman commanders during the war, refused to accept defeat. He gathered the remaining Turkish forces. He fought back against the Greek army, against the European powers, against everyone who thought the Turks were finished. He won. In 1923, the Republic of Turkey was proclaimed. The Ottoman Empire was officially over. 623 years after Osman had started with his 400 soldiers, the empire he had created was gone. Mustafa Kemal became the first president of Turkey. The Turkish people called him Ataturk, father of the Turks, and the world moved on. Ottoman 600 years. What does an empire leave behind after 600 years? Cities. Istanbul is still one of the most beautiful cities in the world. The mosque, the palaces, the covered bazaars, the bridges and the fountains, all built by Ottoman hands. Laws. The Ottoman legal system influenced the laws of many countries that were once part of the empire. Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Albania, Bosnia, all of them shaped by centuries of Ottoman rule. Language. Ottoman Turkish words exist in Arabic, in Greek, in Romanian. An empire leaves traces in language long after it has ended. And perhaps most importantly, the Ottoman Empire showed that it was possible to build something great. From almost nothing. 400 soldiers. A cold mountain valley. A dream. And the patience. And the courage. And the vision. To build something that would last centuries. Think about Osman, standing in that cold valley, looking at the world with 400 men. Most people would have said, "This is impossible. What can 400 men do against the great empires of the world?" But Osman did not think about all the things he did not have. He thought about what he could do with what he had, right now. Today, he started small. He started with 400, and he kept going. And the 400 became 600 years of history. Today, when you learn English, you might feel like Osman in that cold valley, looking at this language, all these words, all this grammar, all these sounds that do not yet feel natural in your mouth, and thinking, "This is too much. This is impossible." But remember, Osman did not conquer half the world in one day. He conquered it one small step at a time. One raid. One new soldier joining his cause. Your English is the same. One word today. One sentence tomorrow. One story understood at the end of the week. And the impossible becomes possible. The difficult becomes natural. And you look back, and you see how far you have come. From where you started. Keep going, my friends. Your empire is waiting to be built. Thank you for listening to this story today. I hope it stayed with you. I hope it gave you something to think about. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like. And if you want to join us every week for more stories like this, please subscribe to Timeless English. Until next time, my friends, keep learning, keep listening, and keep enjoying the beautiful journey of English.